A few housekeeping things before we get started. If you have a question during the webinar, feel free to raise your hand at any time, and I will attempt to answer the question during the webinar. If I don't get a chance to, or if you have additional questions at the end of the webinar, feel free to stick around and ask me questions. I will stay on the line as long as it takes to answer every and all question. And the second thing, if you would like to view this webinar or any of our previous webinars, they are available on our website webinar page. You can click on any one of them. They're available for your view at any time. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about understanding available to promise. What we're going to look at is how we determine what inventory is still available to sell to our customers. We're then going to look at the basic available to promise calculation, and we'll wrap it up by looking at one alternate to the available to promise calculation. So here we go. Our sales folks are always out there doing what they do best. They're banging on the customers' doors. They are making sales of our product, but sometimes in their exuberance, they manage to sell more product than we have available to deliver. And that happens more frequently than we'd all like to see it happen. There is, in a make-to-stock environment, a finite amount of inventory that we can actually use to fulfill shipments today, tomorrow, the next day, and so forth. In the example that we're going to use, we've got 200 units of inventory that are available to be shipped out right now. I could go out to the stock room right now, lay my hands on them if need be. I could pick it up and ship it out the door. In addition to that, I've got 200 units coming out of manufacturing scheduled to be available for shipment on Monday, the 24th of March. So 200 units on hand, another 200 coming for out of production a couple days from now. In addition to that, I've got open customer orders for 160 units on the books right now. And my sales guy, Harry here, he's the great guy. He really knows how to sell the product. I don't think I want to buy a used car from him, but he's great at what he does. He's asking, I got a customer on the line right now. How many can I promise for delivery this week? So take this information. You got 200 on hand. You got 200 due from manufacturing on Monday of next week. You got 160 open orders, and Harry wants to know how many can I ship him this week on a brand new order. So I'm going to put you to work for a minute here. What I want you to do is answer this question. You have one choice and one choice only. How many can sales promise for delivery this week? It's either the quantity on hand, the quantity due from production, the sum of on hand and due from production, or none of the above. So take a minute, review your choices, click which one you think is appropriate, and then we'll see what everybody has to say. Okay, we got about 15 seconds more before I close the poll, and we've got one or two people left to go. Okay, good. Going to close the poll now and see what everybody has to say. So here we go. Let's see what everybody has to say. All right. Some people said the quantity due from production. The problem with that is that material doesn't get here until Monday of next week. And our friend Harry, he wants to know what he can ship to the customer by Friday of this week. Others said the quantity on hand. The problem with that is some of that material has already been promised to customers on those open customer orders. Then another group of you picked the sum of both the on-hand and the quantity due in from production. And again, excuse me 1 minute. Again, the problem with that is a lot of that material has already been promised to existing customer orders. Those of you that picked none of the above, you're on the right track. So let's go back and talk about this for a minute. So our buddy Harry there in the lower right corner, he wants to know, what can I ship now, today, the 19th, the 20th, and the 21st? If we don't want to mess up any of those existing 160 open orders, then the only quantity he can ship is 40 pieces. The only thing he can promise for delivery is 40 pieces. So let's recap here. Now we've looked at how you determine what inventory you have available by looking at what you have on hand, what you have coming from production, and the existing open orders that you have. So now we're going to look at how a standard ERP system will handle the basic available to promise calculation. This grid here comes right out of an ERP system. It basically uses the master production schedule as a data source for customer order promising. It makes promises from the on-hand inventory, that's the inventory in the upper left-hand quadrant, and from future supply, that's the production scheduled receipts in the middle line of this graph. This is a suggested projected available balance, suggested available to promise quantity. The demand manager or the planner has to use their knowledge of what's going on with the actual customers to figure out whether this is actually all that we can promise. And to get this whole thing working is going to require a pretty high level of communication between the demand planner, master planning, the sales folks, and possibly even several customers. So here's how the basic calculation works in an ERP system. You have 200 units on hand right now. We're in the week of 3/17. You have 160 customer orders. So the ERP system would calculate that you have 40 units left available to promise. Now, this basic available to promise calculation makes an assumption. It assumes that by this Friday, the 21st of March, when we turn out the lights at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and all go home for the weekend, that sales will have sold that other 40 units, that those open customer orders will actually have been shipped, and that at the end of the week we will have no open orders, no quantity on hand, and no availability to promise. Now, this logic, the way it works, it takes the on-hand inventory plus any scheduled receipts minus any open customer orders prior to the next scheduled delivery of product from the master production schedule. So if we work that logic, the available to promise for the week of 3/24 and 3/31 will be the 200 pieces of scheduled production receipt on 3/24 minus the current open orders of 20 in the week of 3/24 and 20 in the week of 3/31, which will give us an available promise before the next production run comes in the week of 4/7 of 160 units. This is a standard calculation. It just keeps going through. Again, it assumes that by 4/7 we will have sold and shipped all of that material. So on 4/7 the available to promise will be 140. And then at the end of the period, since we don't have any demand past 4/21, the available to promise is 200. So it's a standard calculation that is part of most ERP systems, and it is a tool to help us negotiate with sales and with customers to give them an accurate idea of what we can actually ship. So that's the basic available to promise calculation. Now, one size does not fit all. And by my estimate, there are most likely 15 different ways to calculate available to promise. During this webinar, I don't have time to go through all of them, so I've picked one as an alternate available to promise methodology that we can review and see how it works differently. This is called a cumulative available to promise. Cumulative, we're dealing with the same information. We have 200 pieces on hand. We have open customer orders, as we've seen by time period. We've got production scheduled receipts. I've thrown in the basic available to promise calculation here just for clarification so that it would be easier to see how the math works here. Now, the available to promise for the first period, the week of 3/17, the current week, is still 40 pieces in the cumulative available to promise calculation. But where it differs is the following weeks. On the week of 3/24, it doesn't assume that sales will have sold all of those 40 units. So it literally takes the 40 units available to promise cumulative for the end of 3/17, adds it to the available to promise basic in 3/24, and comes up with a new available to promise at that point of 200 units. And it carries this calculation through to 4/7. It just keeps adding whatever is uncommitted at the time those production runs come in, and it finishes up with 4/21. Now, the single biggest change between basic available to promise and cumulative available to promise is that in cumulative available to promise, the assumption is that there will be leftover material that is available to promise at the time the next production run comes in. It's not a sales will sell everything, we start fresh at the beginning of the next production run receipt. The advantage of this, if I'm the master scheduler and I'm working with Harry, my sales guy, and we're trying to figure out when we can promise what quantities of delivery for the customers that he's trying to sell product to, I've now got the entire picture. I can say, well, look, Harry, by the end of 4 weeks, we're going to have 540 of these things. So if we can stagger shipments, we can promise them 40 this week, some more next week, some more the week after that, some more the week after that. So it's just a different way to calculate the available to promise. Most ERP systems will give you a variety of calculations that you can use, but the ultimate goal is getting it to where we can help sales do a better job of making commitments with our customers as to what we can ship and when we can ship it, so that from our customer's point of view, we are giving them better customer service by being very good at delivering what we say we're going to deliver when we say we're going to deliver it. So in a nutshell, that's available to promise. If there are any questions, raise your hands and I'll turn your mic on, or you can send me an email. If not, I hope to see many of you next month when we're going to be doing a case study on training supervisors in a warehouse distribution environment. Okay, John, I see you have your hand up there. Let me click your mic on for a minute here. John, it turned your mic on. What's your question?
I'm looking for available to promise in a make-to-order environment.
Well, interestingly, in a make-to-order environment, this same concept works. However, there are some changes that you have to make here. In the case of a make-to-order product, promises are made only from customer orders, not from forecasted demand or inventory or stuff like that. It's really important in a make-to-order environment that the sales force keeps on top of pending customer orders. In other words, things that are in the pipeline, but the customer hasn't booked the business yet. So if you think of it in a make-to-order environment where you only start a job, you only make it when the customer places the order. What you're really doing in the make-to-order environment there is looking at your capacity to make order. If I have this much extra time, if I have this much excess available capacity, I can still promise delivery in a certain time period. So that's how I'd view available to promise in the make-to-order environment. It focuses, forget about the inventory, it focuses on the customer order.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Wilbur, I see you have your hand up. Let me click you on. Wilbur, how you doing today? All right, maybe your microphone isn't on. I see you say, why is available to promise only calculated in periods where there is a scheduled receipt? If you go back to the formula in the textbooks for available to promise, the formula says available to promise is the quantity you have on hand right now, the customer orders you have on the books right now, prior to the next production receipt from your master production schedule. So let me get back into the chart here. So it's saying if we look at period 324, computer's taking a while to come back up. If we look at period 324, it's saying that between when that production run comes in on 324 and when the next production run comes in on 4/7, that we have 160 units left that we can commit. The reason we don't put it in the 324 column and the 331 column is because then it would muddy the water. It would look like you actually have 320 that are available to promise in those time periods. So that's why we only show it in the time period when the master schedule order arrives. Okay, any other questions? Okay, folks, well, thank you all very much, and have a wonderful day, and remember, spring arrives tomorrow after this long winter that we've had. Have a good one. We'll talk to you all next month. Take care.